Hello, and welcome to today's talk. Today I want to talk to you about a different way of observing yourself when you are performing and when you're, more importantly, when you're practicing. So last time I talked about deliberate practice and how important it is, and how it's important to work on the bits you are least good at. And I know that sounds very WYSIWYG, but often we can find ourselves just doing what Anders Ericsson would call naive practice, which is repeating and repeating and repeating. This week, I want to talk to you a little bit about the theories of Tim Gallwey. So Tim Gallwey wrote a book called The Inner Game of Tennis. And one of the things I like best about all the theories he talks about in his book is something called non-judgmental observation. Now, if you are anything like I was, and occasionally am still, when you're practicing, you can have a tendency to beat yourself up. So if you make a mistake, or if you can keep not hitting a note, you can get very frustrated, call yourself an idiot. I can't believe I'm doing that again. I don't know how I'm going to solve this, and become very, very frustrated. And obviously it's out of a desire to sing really, really well. But what is the impact of that language? What does it cause us to think, and how does it cause us to behave? Because it can be the language of our childhood. It can be the language that when we weren't doing what our parents wanted, they used with us, or when we weren't doing what our teachers. Come on, you idiots, get in line. What are you doing? Stop being so stupid. All of that, when they were trying to get us to do things in a better way. So it was done from a good place to try and get us to be better. If we take a look at actually the impact of that on how we perform, it's very interesting, because all that negative language can cause us to be tense. So what can we do about that? How can we change that language? And this is where non-judgmental observation comes in. Some people might say it's just semantics. In fact, my husband often says it's just semantics. But given the vast majority of my practice is based on understanding what people are thinking and listening to how they're talking to themselves, and adjusting that and getting them to think and talk in a different way, it clearly isn't just semantics. So Tim Gallwey talked about non-judgmental observation. And one of the most useful phrases he used, and I use it all the time these days, is the phrase, "that's interesting." So instead of something being good or something being bad, it's simply interesting. Even if it's, I didn't hit that note again. That's really interesting. Now, this ties in with a video I put on the Facebook group recently, which was all about the difference between why and what. And that's interesting, has a much more forward movement to it. So that's interesting makes us think, okay, do I want that to happen again, or do I not want that to happen again? And if I don't want it to happen again, that's interesting. What caused it? What can I shift? If we think about the language, oh, that was awful. Oh God, there I go again. There's no forward movement to it. It's static. In fact, if anything, there's backward movement. There's this, oh, I don't like that. Don't want to go there again. And you can think, my worst times of doing that, I often wouldn't practice because it was so frustrating and I was beating myself up so much. If you say that's interesting, then it creates this environment of analysis. That's interesting. I wonder what that's about. That's interesting. My throat's tight there. I wonder what that's about. Now, is that something physical, or is it something emotional? That's the next question. So I think it's something physical. Okay, so what can I do differently that would mean my throat wasn't tense there? And suddenly we're partway down the path to solving the issue. Whereas if we'd gone, oh my God, I've done it again, we're nowhere down the path of solving it. We're just down the path of frustration. So if you can introduce that phrase, that's interesting, when you're practicing, when you're rehearsing, then it gives you freedom to develop. It reduces the amount of shame, because then nothing's good or nothing's bad. It's just really interesting. That's interesting. My son is shouting at me right now. Is much more likely to produce a positive analysis of what's going on and how I might solve it than, oh, he shouldn't be shouting at me, that's really bad. So that, if you can think of it in those scenarios, that's interesting, opens up the world of analysis. And once you open up that world of analysis as opposed to criticism, then you have a much greater prospect of solving things more swiftly. It also reduces that tension that we bring in through those critical words. Take, for example, if someone were talking to you the way you talk to yourself, or if you were talking to someone else the way you talk to yourself. Imagine the sort of tension that would bring to their body. Imagine what sort of thoughts it would bring to their minds. And think then how that has an effect on you when you talk to yourself that way. It's no different. But if you can go to the non-judgmental observation, then it creates this space for evolving a better technique, as well as a better mindset. So I cover this a lot more in my online course, and we go into it in quite some depth. So this is really just touching the surface. But that question, that statement, that's interesting, is really the key to the whole thing. And if you can adopt that, you'll find everything else follows much more quickly and swiftly and easily. Don't forget that I am running a 5-day challenge starting on Monday. So if you haven't signed up for the 5-day challenge, click the link and sign up for the 5-day challenge. It's going to be slightly different from my normal things, because I'm going to be in the group daily answering questions and talking to people about the process and the tips and tools that I'm giving out each day next week. It won't be in this group. So in order to be in the 5-day challenge, you have to click the link and go to a separate group. That's just to keep things clean, so I know what's where. I will see you this time next week. Thanks for listening. And I hope you find lots of things interesting and nothing good or bad.